האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dober V'yetcher to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Korach, the Parsha coming up, of course, this coming Shabbos. And we're going to take a look at Os Zion, section number 7. And before we do, we'll look at a pasuk from the Parsha that the Zera Shimshon is going to open this piece with. And of course, this has to do with the episode of Korach and his followers and their rebellion. So the pasuk says as follows. This pasuk comes from Perek Yud Zion, pasuk Vav, and it is after Korach and his followers committed their transgressions and had their rebellion, and then of course they were punished. And after that it said, "Vayilonu kol adas b'nei Yisrael mimocharos," and all of the congregation of Bnei Yisrael complained the next day. Al Moshe v'al Aharon, on Moshe and Aharon Lamor, saying, Atem hamitem es am Hashem. You have killed members of the people of the nation of Hashem. So the Zera Shimshon is going to get into what was the nature of this complaint that the people complained against Moshe and Aaron about the fact that the Korach and his followers had been killed, had been punished, and had died. So let's get right into the Zera Shimshon. Vayilonu v'chulu, and the people complained, etc. Mimocharos, the next day, al Moshe v'al Aharon, against Moshe and Aaron, v'chule, etc. Atem hamitem et am Hashem, you have killed members of the nation of Hashem. So that, of course, is the pasuk we just read. So the Zera Shimshon says, kosher. There's a difficulty here. After all of these people, all of Bnei Yisrael, in other words, had seen with their own eyes, kama osos umofsim sha'asa Moshe, all of the signs and wonders, all of the miraculous things that Moshe had done, v'hamishpat asher shofat es Korach va'adaso, and the justice that had been meted out to Korach and his followers after the people had witnessed all of that. Ech molu es libam, how did they fill up their hearts? That means how could they possibly come lachalok alav to argue and to complain against Moshe by devarim halolu in these matters? Meaning, if nothing else was ever clear to Bnei Yisrael, to the people, if nothing was ever totally clear to them, it should have been 100% crystal clear to them that they shouldn't have complained about what happened to Korach and his followers. Because how could anyone question Moshe's leadership and authority and question that that everything he did wasn't supported by Hashem when they had seen all of the miracles that he brought and all of the plagues and the Kriyas Yamsuf and everything that happened in the Midbar up until this point, they had all witnessed it. So certainly they should have known that questioning Moshe and trying to rebel against his leadership was something that was going to be severely stamped out. And in addition to that, they should have known that it was mishpat, it was just. It was completely according to midah, the quality of justice of mishpat, the punishment that went to Korach and his followers. So it's almost like they're saying, okay, we want to complain more, and God forbid, punish us also. How are they not afraid to come and to present complaints to Moshe about what happened to Korach and his followers? That's the Zera Shimshon's very fundamental and powerful question. V'yesh lomar, their next paragraph, so the Zera Shimshon says, we can say, Shetilunosam hayisa al hamosayim v'chamishim ish. Their specific complaint was regarding the 250 men, shenisrafu, who were burned, al shenichnesu lahaktir ketores, because they came to offer incense. V'zeh ketores lo asu, and this incense offering that they brought, they didn't do that, ela b'devar Moshe, except because Moshe told them to. She'amar lahem, because he said to them, Zos asu, this you should do, v'chule, etc. So Moshe told the 250 men who were followers of Korach to bring an offering of incense, a fire pan and with incense in it, and to bring that offering. V'huksha lahem, and this is what bothered the people. Kavonas Moshe, what was Moshe's intention? Litain Eitza, when he gave advice, when he counseled Lemosayim v'chamishim ish, to the 250 men, lahakdir ketores, to bring this offering of ketores, kedei sheyamusu, in order for them to die. In other words, if the 250 men totally deserved to die, and Moshe knew that, and that was the clear message that Moshe had received from Hashem, so, okay, so they had to die. So let them die with the earth swallowing them up, as it did with Dasan and Aviram, as we'll see, as the Torah tells us about the earth opening up and swallowing up Dasan and Aviram and their families. So let that happen to the 250. Let them all die together that way. On the other hand, if they didn't deserve to die, why would Moshe, so to speak, according to the way the people perceive the episode, why would Moshe tell them, you guys don't have to die, but I'm going to tell you what to do, and then you are going to die. I'm going to tell you to bring an offering, and then I know that Hashem is going to burn you all up because you shouldn't be bringing this offering. If they didn't deserve to die, then why would Moshe tell them that? So the Zera Shimshon says, it's not that the people came, at least originally, it's not that they came and their complaint was, why did anyone have to die? Zera Shimshon says that would not have made sense. Actually, their complaint was specifically on the 250 men who offered the incense, specifically because Moshe told them to, and that's the question that the people had. Why, Moshe, did you give them this instruction which led to their deaths? Next paragraph. Ubishlama, it would make sense. Im haya omer af ledosan ve'aviram sheyakrivu haketores. The people reasoned. What the Zera Shimshon is going to do now is going to explain what the people's reasoning was behind their complaint. So the people reasoned, if Moshe had also told Dasan and Aviram, who stood out in everyone's minds as really being wicked and being extreme in their views in terms of their rebellion and rejection of Moshe, if he had told them, Sheyakrivu haketoras, that they should also come along with the 250 men who were offering incense, Hayisi Omer, then the people reasoned, we could have said, or each one thought, I would have then said, Shekulam Shavim Bachet. All of these people, the 250 men, Dasan and Aviram, of course, Korach, all of them were equal in their sin. V'chulam cholku al Moshe u'nevuaso, and all of them were arguing against Moshe in his prophecies. They were claiming that Moshe wasn't actually passing on and transmitting in every one of his communications to the people. He wasn't actually communicating prophecies from Hashem every time. They were disagreeing about that. O al kahunas Aharon, or perhaps they were taking issue with the fact that Moshe had appointed Aharon, his brother, to be the Kohen Gadol, and that all of Aharon's descendants would be the Kohanim for all future generations. But if everyone had died together with the burning of the incense, then the people would have said, V'hadin nosei lahamisam. Then it must have been just, since they all did the same sin and they're all equally guilty, then the law must have been for all of them to be killed. O ligrom lahem tachbulos, or to cause there to be a kind of scheme or plan, kedesha yamusu, in order that they should die. If everyone had died the same way, the 250 Korach, Dasan and Aviram, the 250 men, if they had all died the same way, let's say had all died because they brought incense and they had died that way as one possible way for all of them to die at the same time, or perhaps all of them had been swallowed up by the earth, then the people would have said, okay, they all did the same sin. They were all equally guilty. They all deserved the same punishment, which either would have been an outright death, like being swallowed up by the earth, or what Moshe did, where he set up a situation, so to speak, a plan or a scheme or a stratagem. He set it up, he organized it, and that ultimately brought about their deaths. The people would have been okay with that. Did the Isa b'Shulchan Aruch, and this concept actually that the Zera Shimshon is saying the people would have been okay with, we see it brought down in Halach and Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya, in the section of Shulchan Aruch called Yoredeya. Vizeh Asimin Kuf Nun Ches, chapter 158. Vizeh Lishono, and here is a quote from the Shulchan Aruch that the Zera Shimshon is connecting to our episode. Ha'apikorsim, the heretics, Vehem osam shekofrim batorah, which refers to people who deny the divinity of the Torah, uvanevua mi Yisrael, and they deny that there were prophets amongst the Jewish people who transmitted their prophecies from their messages that they received from Hashem. So the heretics who deny that, mitzvah lehorgam, it is a mitzvah, it is a command to kill them. People like that deserve, they should be killed. Im yesh biyodo koach lehorgam b'sayif b'farhesya. If there is at the specific time the power in the Jewish community to kill them with a sword, meaning capital punishment in public. In other words, if the Jewish people have, for example, the Sanhedrin, and they're carrying out death penalties, and they have the authority and the ability to do that, then that's something that they should do, and it should be publicly done so that everyone understands this is the law. If you're going to come and you're going to publicly deny the divinity of the Torah, and you're going to deny that Hashem gave prophecies to the Jewish people, and of course this is with witnesses and this is with warning, then they should be put to death. Horgam, then they should be killed. V'im lav, and if they don't have the power to do this, yovo ba'alilos ad sheyisabev harigosam, then a plan should be put into play which result in their death. So the Shulchan Aruch clearly says that if people can't be executed according to the din when they deserve, these types of people deserve to be receive capital punishment, then it's also laudatory, it's also appropriate to bring about the deaths of these people through some other method that results in their death, even though it's not as kind of clear and direct as bringing a capital punishment penalty to them. Ad kan Lashono, till here's a quote from the Shulchan Aruch. The Zera Shimshon, as we've seen several times before, often connects the halacha as seen in the Shulchan Aruch to what people in the Torah did, because of course the halacha comes from the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh, that the people at the time of the in the Midbar had all of that information. So if we see something in Shulchan Aruch, we should see it reflected in the actions of the people in the Torah, and that's what he's saying here. So the people in this case of Korach, according to the Zera Shimshon, they would have understood and accepted it if everyone involved in Korach's rebellion had been killed the same way. Top of the next paragraph, top of the next column. Aval ata, but now, Moshe lo omar shedosan va'avirum yakrivu haketoras. Moshe did not tell Dosan and Aviram to come and offer incense along with the other 250 men and Korach. Korach was included with the group of people, the 250 men who came to offer their ketoras. Not included, he was in addition to the 250, he also came to offer ketoras, and Aaron, of course, came to offer ketoras. That's what Moshe said. So, but Dosan and Aviram, Moshe never told them to come offer incense. Ela hamosayim v'chamishim ishim Korach, but only it was the 250 men who came to offer incense with Korach, according to Moshe's instructions. Once the people saw that, yesh svara lomar, then they said, wait a minute, we now have a reason to say sheyesh chiluk, that there must be a difference bein mi shecholak al nevuoso shel Moshe between those who argued against and took issue with the prophecies of Moshe. They questioned Moshe's nevuos, l'mi shecholak al kehunoso shel Aharon. To those that didn't necessarily question Moshe's nevuah in general, but they took issue, they argued against the appointment of Aaron as the Kohen Gadol. Ulefi shehamosayim v'chamishim ish lo hayu kol kach chotim. And now, again, this is the people's reasoning. Since it must be that the 250 men were not as serious in their sin as Dosan and Aviram, Shahare lo cholku al Moshe unevuoso, because apparently they did not generally question Moshe's authority and his nevuah, rak al kahunats Aaron, rather they were only coming to argue against the appointment of Aaron as the Kohen Gadol. Then the people reasoned their sin was less. The 250 men had a lesser sin, and that was indicated by the fact that Moshe himself distinguished between Dosan and Aviram, who would be swallowed up by the earth, which is by far the worst punishment, as opposed to these 250 men who they reasoned were punished in a lesser way. Yes, it's true they died, but they were punished in a lesser type of death than Dosan and Aviram. So therefore, the people reasoned it must be because there's two different types of sins going on here in this rebellion. There's one rebellion, but we have the true, real, hardcore sinners, Dosan and Aviram, rebelling against Moshe and saying he is not a representative of Hashem. We're disagreeing with his prophecies, and we're claiming that Hashem doesn't speak through Moshe. That's Dosan and Aviram. They get the worst punishment. They get swallowed up by the earth. But the 250 men, the people reasoned, they had less of a sin. What was their sin? They said, we accept Moshe. In general, we accept Moshe, but there's one thing we're questioning, one thing we're concerned about. Why did Moshe appoint Aaron to be the Kohen Gadol? Was that, or maybe Moshe, maybe in that one thing slipped up and appointed his brother without receiving a clear nevuah from Hashem on that point. And that's what they questioned, and that's why they received what the people perceived as a different, lower level type of punishment. Kemoshe Kosav Maharsha, as the famous commentator on the Gemara, the Maharsha, writes, the Perek Chelek and the 10th Perek of Masechah Sanhedrin. And now what we're going to read actually for some many lines is a quote from the Maharsha, a quote from the commentator, the Maharsha. He says, Mishum Hachi, because of this, Lo Hayu Chayovim Misa Kedosan Va'aviram. Because of this distinction between the 250 men who brought the incense and the Dosan and Aviram, the 250 men were not equal, were not obligated to die. They didn't have the same level of guilt and sin that would make them equivalent in the death penalty that was given to Dosan ve'Aviram. Ve'af Korach, and even Korach, af al pi shecholak al Moshe, even though he definitely disagreed with Moshe and was leading a rebellion against Moshe, there was even a case that could be made to spare him from the death penalty, because his eye deceived him. And this comes, as you can see in the parentheses, from the Bamidbar Rabbah, from the Medrash Rabbah on Bamidbar. Rashi actually also brings this Medrash down on the Parsha. And let's explain the idea. What is said to us is that Korach received a vision from Hashem, not a nevuah, but he had a dream in which he foresaw that great men would come from his descendants. Great leaders, great men would come from his descendants. And if so, Korach thought, I must be a great man myself. Look who's going to come from my lineage. Look who's going to come out from me. And therefore I must be a truly great leader myself. And that led him to take issue with Moshe, because he mistakenly thought that he himself was on a comparable level to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Maharsha says Korach had a very unique experience and a very unique background to that led him to lead the rebellion, and that could be viewed as a mitigating circumstance, which, as we're going to see in the next paragraph, didn't apply to Dosan and Avira, and didn't apply to the 200 and the 250 men had even less of an Avera. Next paragraph. Aval Dosan va'aviru cholkom gam al malois Moshe. But Dosan and Aviram completely disagreed, took issue, and argued against Moshe bizodon vafesha, with complete intentionality and complete rebellious sinfulness. So the Maharsha, who's being quoted here, distinguishes between Dosan and Aviram, again, as the people viewed it. Dosan and Aviram were the ultimate extreme sinners here, and they completely rebelled and rejected Moshe's leadership in every possible way, and they did not even have the mitigating circumstance that Korach could claim, or that other people could claim for Korach, which was that he had this a true vision of the future in which he saw tremendously important and holy great descendants coming out from him. And so therefore he was tricked. So Dosan and Aviram didn't have that. They couldn't even claim that. So therefore we see three levels, according to the Maharsha and the Zera Shimshon, that he's developing this idea. We see three levels of sinfulness. We see the highest level, which is Dosan and Aviram. And we see the levels below that of Korach, who did similarly to Dosan and Aviram, did lead this rebellion and initiate a rebellion against Moshe, but there's a mitigating circumstance in his case. And then we see on the lowest level of the three, the 250 men who were not there to rebel against Moshe, but were there to rebel against Moshe's decision to appoint Aharon as the Kohen Gadol. So let's pause for a moment. If that was the people's reasoning, then we can understand why it really caught their attention when they saw that Dosan and Aviram were not instructed to bring the incense, but rather died in an amazing and terrifying and unprecedented way of being swallowed up by the earth, which again is absolutely the most horrendous death in this episode, the death of Dosan and Aviram and their families, then that's different than the burning of the people that brought the incense, which apparently, we'll see more about this soon, which apparently included the 250 men and Korach, who was offering incense with them. And so the people said there's different levels of guilt here, and if there's different levels of guilt, perhaps not all of these people should have died. And we'll see how the Zera Shimshon is going to state that. Continuing in this quote from the Maharsha. Ulekach ksiv, and therefore it's written in the Pasuk, it's written in the Torah, Hamishimu Masayim Machtos. Moshe says the 250 the 250 men should bring 250 fire pans to offer the incense. Ve'ata, and you, that's to Korach. Moshe is saying this to Korach. Ve'aron, and to Aaron. Moshe specifically left out Dosan and Aviram when he told Korach that he should bring 250 men and himself to offer incense. V'Dosan ve'Aviram lo hikrivu, and Dosan and Aviram were not instructed by Moshe or invited by Moshe to bring the incense offering. V'lochein, and therefore Hamosayim v'Chamishim ish, the 250 men, lo nenshu, they were not punished. Ella b'sreifas neshama v'guf kayam. It's true, the Torah says they were burned, but it means not that their bodies were burned, but that a fire entered them and burned their neshama. The guf kayam, but their bodies continue to exist whole, not meaning their bodies had life left in them, but their bodies were not burned. So meaning the 250 men did not die as painful and horrific a death as Dosan and Aviram did. Aval Dosan va'Aviram chotu b'chol gufam u'me'odam, But Dosan and Aviram sinned with their entire bodies and all of their power and their strength and their wealth. V'lochein nivleu bakol mikol kol. And therefore, the Marsha says, they were swallowed up in the earth with everything, from everything, and everything. Even their belongings and their families were swallowed up with them. And of course, we recognize that phrase from the benching. So the Zera Shimshon is distinguishing clearly between what happened to Dosan Aviram and what happened to the 250 men, and showing how the people assume that it made a lot of sense because of the different fates of these people, that they must have had different levels of sin. Now this Marsha is going to move over to Korach, and what he's going to tell us about Korach, I think, might be very surprising. The Korach atzmo, and Korach himself, yesh omrim, there are those that say, there is an authentic opinion, in other words, shelo nisraf velo nivla, that he wasn't burned with the men who offered the incense, velo nivla, and he wasn't swallowed up in the earth like Dosan and Aviram. Ki lo chota kol kach, because he did not sin so terribly as they did. Ela sheto'a bishvil shero'a, but rather, as we've said, he made a mistake. He erred because he saw in this vision shalsheles gedola, a great chain of descendants, yotza mimenu, that came from him. Ela shemes b'magefa, but rather he did die, but he died in the plague. What plague is being referred to? So in our parsha, we see that there's the two immediate deaths. One is the people being swallowed up, as we've said, that included Dosan and Aviram. And then there's the people offering the incense, the 250 men who were burned. And then after that, when the people came and kind of argued against the previous deaths and didn't totally accept the justice in that, then a plague came and killed more people. And Korach, according to this opinion, this new opinion that the Marsha is introducing and the Zera Shimshon's bringing down, Korach died in the plague. He didn't die with Dosan and Aviram. He didn't die with the 250 men. He survived both of those punishments, and he survived until the plague, and he died in the plague, which would indicate a true mitigating circumstances in his favor. Again, we're not saying any of them, at this point, we're not saying that anyone was spared. All of them died, but they died in different ways, which apparently was to indicate different levels of guilt. Bottom of the column, v'yesh omrim, and others say, shenisraf v'nivla. Another opinion, which we might say is completely on the opposite extreme from the first opinion, says, no, Korach bore the ultimate guilt, shenisraf v'nivla. He was not only burned, he was burned and swallowed up in the earth. Ho'il, since, continuing in the next page, top of the column, because he was first to start the rebellion and he was the owner of this whole incident. So from this perspective, there are no mitigating circumstances that we can truly bring for Korach, and he received the worst punishment of everyone because he was burned just like the 250 incense offerers, and he was also swallowed up in the earth like Dosan and Aviram. So two very different opinions about what happened to Korach. The ilu nisraf velo nivla, according to this opinion, had Korach been burned but not swallowed up in the earth, hayu habluim misramim, then the people who had been swallowed up in the earth would have had a just complaint. They would have said, wait a minute, Korach started this. We're Korach's followers. We got swallowed up in the earth, but Korach didn't. So Korach had to get swallowed up in the earth. If Korach alternatively had been swallowed up with Dosan and Aviram, but hadn't suffered the burning punishment of the 250 men, then those men that had suffered the burning that happened with the incense offerings, they would have had a legitimate complaint to say, how did Korach, get away without being burned, and we're being burned. So according to this second opinion, Korach suffered all of the punishments that were happened to his followers. He was both burned and swallowed up in the earth. Now the Zera Shimshon is going to take over. Now it's the end of the quote from the commentator Maharsha, and the Zera Shimshon is going to come back to put the pieces together and explain why the pasuk said that the people complained the next day. Meaning, why didn't the Torah say, and the people complained right when it happened, right? If the people were upset that the 250 men, or at least they were questioning why the 250 men had to die and why Moshe told them to do something that seemingly led to their deaths, perhaps unnecessarily. If that's what bothered them, why didn't they complain right away? Why does the Torah say they complained the next day? So the Zera Shimshon is going to help us understand that. V'lochein, and therefore, Bayom harishon hayu misupakim bisvara zo. On the first day, that means the actual day of the incident itself, when the incense burners were burned and Dasan and Aviram were swallowed up, on that day, they were not sure. They weren't completely sure about what was going on and why these distinctions were being made. They were doubtful about it. Avolonis ra'amu. But they didn't yet complain, mishum de'efsher nami lomar, because from their perspective, it was also possible to say, shekulam hayu chayovim misa. Perhaps they reasoned maybe everybody deserved to die. Elisha Dasan va'aviram, but Dasan and Aviram hoil shehirbu lifshoa, since, as we've said, they really laid it on thick in their in their sinfulness. So their death was more severe. So the people were still thinking, all right, we're not sure why Dasan and Aviram's death was this, and the 250 men were that, and Korach, different opinions about what happened to him. So they were doubtful. They were misupik. What's exactly going on? We're not sure how to make sense of all of this. But they weren't yet ready to truly complain and question Moshe about this, because they thought, you know what, maybe it simply means all of the people involved in the rebellion, Korach, Dasan, Aviram, the Tifra, they all deserve to die, and now they've all been killed. They've all suffered the death penalty in different ways. And Dasan and Aviram, who were swallowed up in the earth, that's because we can all remember and recognize and concede that they were truly, truly extreme in their sinfulness. Aval b'yom hamocharos, but the next day, she'ro'u she'bnei Korach nitzolu. The next day, after all the commotion died down a little bit, they saw that the sons of Korach had been spared. This fact we see in the Torah itself, but not here in our parsha of Korach, but later on in Parshas Pinchas, the Torah specifically says, Uvenei Korach lo mesu. The Torah there is describing a census that took place, and it's going through the different tribes and families, and it says, Uvenei Korach lo mesu. The sons of Korach did not die. So the people saw the next day the sons of Korach walking around, and they were thunderstruck. How could it be that the sons of Korach, they were Korach's followers, they supported their father? How did they survive this? How did they not get punished and killed in everything that happened yesterday? Usvurim hayu, and they thought, shenitzolu lefi, that they thought the sons were spared because shelo hayu lahem kol kachet, because their sin wasn't so terrible. Sheta'u bisvaras avihem. Perhaps they made the same mistake that their father made. Just like the father had the vision of the great descendants, and therefore made a mistake about his own destiny, he certainly would have shared that vision with his sons, and perhaps they made the same mistake. And because they weren't acting out of pure malice and pure sinfulness, but rather somewhat of a mistake, that's why Korach's sons were saved. This is what the people thought. Nisramu al Moshe v'Aaron, and that is what brought them to complain against Moshe and Aaron, not the first day, but the next day. lefi shenosnu ha'etza lekorach, because they gave the advice to Korach, ulumasayim v'chamishim ish, into the 250 men, top of the next column, lahaktir ketores, to bring the incense. To below Eitzazo, without the advice that Moshe and Aaron had told these men, Moshe specifically had told them, bring incense and do an offering. Without that, the people reasoned that these 250 men certainly would have been spared. Because they didn't sin so grievously, just like the sons of Korach, according to the people's mistaken reasoning, were spared because their sin because there were mitigating factors there. So now the pieces all fall together for us. We understand the people's mistake, and we can go back and see how that very first question that the Zera Shimshon started with, how in the world did the people have the temerity, the audacity? How could it occur to them to come question Moses' judgment right after they saw everything that had happened? And the answer is they reasoned carefully. They observed carefully what happened, and they reasoned it through, and they saw, wait a minute, Dathan and Aviram swallowed up in the earth. 250 men, and probably Korach burned up in a different way where their bodies survived and their only neshamas were burned. And the sons of Korach weren't even punished. They survived all of this. So now they're like how can this be true justice? There must have been a way for Moshe to save and spare the 250 men also, and perhaps Korach, because of mitigating circumstances. But in their mind, they said, he didn't do that. Why didn't he spare them? He should have spared them. And that was their complaint. And that's where their reasoning took them. Last paragraph. Dibishlama hashta. It makes sense now. Shemesu hamasayim v'chamishim ish. The 250 men now, after the fact, the people saw they had been killed. Af shelo hayelahem kol kachet. Even though, according to the people's reasoning, their sins were not so terrible. Gam Korach tzorach lamusi mohem. So if the 250 men died, then certainly Korach would have to die also. Af al pi sheyeshlo hisnatzlus. Even though he had a conceivable argument to survive, lomar to say she'eno hitatu, his vision led him astray. Nonetheless, if the 250 men died and were punished, then certainly Korach would. V'hoil shemeis im hasrufim, and since Korach died with the incense, the bringers of incense, that's where he was. That's Korach also brought the incense with them. Tzorech sheyamus nami im habluim, and as we've said before, he also had to suffer along with the people swallowed up in the earth. Kedei shelo yisramu, so that neither group would have any kind of valid argument against the punishments that Hashem meted out. However, im hayunitzolim hamosayim v'chamishim ish, if the 200 men had actually been spared, mitam she'ein lahem kol kachet, because of this reasoning that the people had that their sin wasn't so terrible, az gam Korach hayunitzolim mohem, then Korach also would have been spared with them, lefisha eno hitatu, because you could also have a mitigating circumstance for him that his vision deceived him. V'lachein omru lahem, and therefore the people came and they complained to Moshe, to Moshe and Aaron, atem hamitem, you killed members of the Am Hashem in an unjust way, in an unjust fashion. Klomar, sibavtem lahem hamisa. What they meant to say was, you brought about their deaths, shelo kadin, not according to the true justice. So the people, as we've seen, did not just come to complain like in other episodes where it looks almost like they were looking for a pretext to complain. Here they watched carefully what had happened. They didn't even complain on the first day, although they felt like things were not exactly, that there were questions and there were doubts about what had happened. But when they saw the next day that the sons of Korach had survived, and it did not, the truth of that fact did not occur to them. We know from Chazal, of course, the reason the sons of Korach survived is because they did a tshuva gemura. They completely repented and they were spared because of their tshuva, and that did not apply to Korach or Dosan and Aviram or the 250 men. No one before their punishments did a tshuva gemura. Only the sons of Korach did, and that's why they were spared. But the people who complained didn't open their minds to that thought, and they said, we see injustice here. And who brought about this injustice? We're going to blame Moshe and Aaron because they, according to the people's reasoning, set up this whole plan to bring incense, and that ultimately led to the deaths of these men, and that wasn't truly necessary according to the mistaken logic and mistaken deficient reasoning of the people. So the Zera Shimshon has opened with a question about where were the people coming from. He's explained to us very carefully, along with the support he brought from the Maharsha, the commentary of the Maharsha, exactly what the people were reasoning, exactly what disturbed them and bothered them. That doesn't mean they were right. They were clearly wrong, and their complaints were not at all accurate or correct. However, we now understand the answer to the Zera Shimshon's opening question as to what they were thinking when they came and complained to Moshe and Aaron. Yasher Koach for joining us in this week's learning of the Zera Shimshon. We look forward, God willing, to learning again in the Zera Shimshon next week.